Uh, my my beautiful wife has decided that interviewing Richard Spencer was a bridge too far. So, but you know what? I agreed to do this, and we've got it scheduled. And this was something that, after the first night, I came out of the chat of Luke Ford's show. Luke Ford invited me on. Eventually, I became his co-host. But one of my buddies asked me after the first night, like, if you get into this, like, what would be your goal? And I was like, I really would just love to be on a stream with Richard Spencer. I wouldn't even necessarily want to interact with him. I just want to have my avatar next to his.
But at what cost?
Yeah. I didn't realize it was going to be this expensive. I don't know. Frame, does your girlfriend have any issues with?
This is a conversation. I think that on philosophical grounds, I think it's important for everyone to explore ideologies, and in an attempt to not only be able to look, it's a bedrock American principle that everybody should have freedom of expression, and that you should be able to debate these things or talk about them on the grounds of their ideas and not who articulates them. And so I think that any centrist or libertarian or classical liberal would agree to that general principle, and it is in that spirit that the three of us are coming together tonight to talk about ideas.
Sure. Let me just mention, I was taken aback when you first announced that your wife had thrown you out of the house because you were hosting me. I thought you were joking, but apparently you're not. I guess I've been involved with some, disasters in my time, but I definitely did not want to break up a marriage. So I really hope you guys get back together, and that's definitely not my intention. But I do applaud you. I mean, if you're going to stick to your guns like this, then I definitely.
I think. Look, I think things will work themselves out. I don't see the advantage in folding or compromising on something where and I think my regular viewers know this. My wife is Jewish. She sees the alt-right. She associates it with, some of the more 1488 elements, anti-Semitism, things like that. And, that's not really my focus in this. And I don't think she understands, Richard, that's not, if I'm putting words in your mouth, stop me. But, I don't think it's your focus either. And I think she doesn't quite understand, just because you're sort of the media figurehead of this, you catch a lot of that.
Right. I mean, I catch a lot of that in the kind of 90s skinhead stuff, or he's literally Hitler. Yeah, I get it. And I have to work against it. But the people really, really want to promote it. So it is what it is. But I bet your wife will watch this stream. Maybe out of some kind of maybe morbid curiosity or something like that, and I think she'll probably get a different impression of me.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for.
And Brundle, could I just say, get a quick word in on that particular point? As a Jewish person, I obviously would not be involved, and proudly so at that. I've obviously would not be involved if I, if this was like something that I perceived to be anti-Semitic. This is purely about positivity to me, and the message that I am trying to promote, and that I hope to spread to people who believe in, just general American bedrock principles, and who are sort of from all over the spectrum, is the notion of positivity for all groups. And if we're going to live in a world of identity politics, then there has to be equality on that front. And so there's obviously, to the extent that we're talking about things that relate to, Jewish considerations, that we're really talking about it in the realm of identity politics. And, with sort of the nascent, one of the things that Richard, sort of popularized in 2000, I know he's been doing this for some time, but what he sort of brought into the national conversation, in 2015 and 16, in tandem with Trump, was sort of the idea of white identity politics. and my view on this is whether you're left, right, or center, if there's going to be identity politics, it needs to involve everyone. And so, that's not an anti anyone tenet. And so when there are references to Jewish identity politics, it's in the context of, well, European people should enjoy the equal rights in that respect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I more or less agree. Now, we could go into this point, but maybe I'll save it because Jewish identity politics is going to be fundamentally different than European identity politics, and so on. And in terms of world history, this, sometimes when people stress things like, if there's going to be identity politics for one group, there must be identity politics for all, or I'm a nationalist for all nations. I hear this from Ramsey Paul a lot. And I don't want to counter-signal that too hard, because I think it's actually perfectly good rhetoric, and it appeals to our innate sense of fairness and fair play, and so on. But it's not the whole story. Let's just put it that way.
So one subject I wanted to bring up that we had talked about in the pre-show is this Lauren Rose situation, Richard. I haven't followed all that. Can you bring us up to speed?
Sure. Well, first off, let me say that our movement, particularly since Charlottesville, has had a tremendous amount of infighting, and I don't want to add to that in the sense of this, we all hate each other, we just want to call each other names and so on. I'm certainly not blameless in all this, but I do think that we should get away from it. So I don't have any fundamental problem with Lauren Rose at all. But when I do disagree with someone, I'm going to tell them. I think it was earlier this morning. I just kind of sounded off a little bit in a way that was more emotional, I guess, or just about a basic sense of fairness and giving even the devil his due. And there's a lot of piling on when it comes to Patrick Little and by extension Paul Nehlen. And this idea that these guys are losers and they just totally suck and they're awful and we should just shit on them. And I know that kind of makes us feel good. And, I have been quite explicit in my criticism of Patrick Little and Paul Nehlen. In fact, I was one of the first, if not the first major figure to basically give what was good faith, but was pretty serious criticism of Paul Nehlen and just say that you're going in the wrong direction. You need to try to if you want to be a normie friendly winning candidate, you've got to do this, and you simply cannot do that. And if you want to be a kind of Ron Paul educational candidate, then you're not doing a great job, tweeting out 4chan type memes and playing to the shitlords. They're not going to vote for you, and it's really not the most inspiring thing, to be honest. So I said that in December. I made a video in January. So I was on record being not particularly pleased with both of these campaigns. Yeah. However, I think we should give even the devil his due. And I think if we're going to criticize someone seriously, we have to be serious. And actually, even Nick Fuentes was, I think, not. I saw a clip. He was on some show, and Nick Fuentes got a little edgy as he does, but he wasn't being entirely unfair, And so basically, I was just saying, like, look, it makes us feel good just to denounce people and say how shitty they are. But the fact is, even if both of those campaigns were misguided, and I think they were. These guys took risk and they both paid personal prices. And the other thing is that we can learn lessons from what happened. And just this endless piling on just struck me as a bit distasteful, to be honest. And so I said that, and I think it began. Again, I think people were trying to straw man me like I was a big fan of these two men, and I simply am not. I've been quite critical of them. But again, I think it gets at this sense of what do we want to be as the alt-right? What are we going to be? Are we going to be a movement that is, pro-Republican? It's all about winning. It's all about here and now. We're American nationalist. I hear that a lot. Or are we going to actually be a vanguard movement that is introducing new ideas into the mainstream? I don't want to get on my high horse too much, but look, the term ethno-state is a term that the cognoscenti are aware of, that even some normies have now heard. They had never heard that term before 2 years ago. The idea that we should play white identity politics, as opposed to this endless counter-signaling of identity politics. This is something new that we've entered, and we've created that as a vanguard. And what I sense is that with the Trump movement, we felt like we were winning, and I got into it too. I was as euphoric as the next guy when it came to Trump. I said "Hail Trump" after all, notoriously. And we felt like we were winning. And it was this fascinating moment where, because the mainstream conservatives and the GOP elite, Mitt Romney, all those people were objectively just attacking Trump. They hated him. They would almost prefer Hillary, all that kind of stuff. We almost did an end run around them where we were his vanguard. We were his intellectuals, and we were winning. We weren't running a campaign that gets 1.5% or that can't get on the ballot. We were winning. And I think people want to bring back that feeling, and I know why. It's very human. But the fact is, we can't just kind of continually move goalposts, and we can't just adhere to the mainstream right and American nationalism and all this kind of stuff that the GOP plays, and then pretend like we're winning. In the sense of, we're just American nationalists, and therefore Republican victories are our victories. It's all going in our direction, guys. Come on. No, I don't believe that. If the alt-right is going to be an alternative right, it is going to criticize these things. We are going to be a bit dissonant, in the sense that there's going to be a nice harmonious choir. We're going to be a kind of sour note, a little too sharp sometimes. And that is the lot that we're in. I get the idea that we want to win. I want to win too. I am a radical pragmatist in the sense that I believe winning is the essence of what we are doing. This is not merely about truth. Winning is more important than merely being right. I don't want to be right and then the white race goes off into the sunset or I end up in a prison cell. I would prefer to be right and win. And so winning is what's important. So I am not a romantic, I hate politics or anything like that. I just don't want us to pretend like we're winning by adopting a kind of, kind of cheap
purity spiraling.
Or by purity spiraling. There are kind of two ways that the alt-right can go. It can go in a purity spiral way where, if you don't demand, the death camps tomorrow morning or something, you're a cuck or whatever. And that's one obviously terrible direction to go in. But then a kind of other direction is the other way. And just to be a little, again, to play this wishful thinking game where, hey guys, more white pills, because we're American nationalists. That's what we're about. I don't buy that. We are going to be a vanguard. That's how this works. We open up new space. And there's this other aspect to this, and I think I mentioned this on a couple of the shows, but what I've seen with the alt-right very often is that there will be these shibboleths, and shibboleth is obviously a term from the Old Testament. I believe it was if the shibboleth was itself a shibboleth, so the way that one pronounced the word shibboleth would indicate what ethnicity one was from, and if you pronounced it wrong, you'd get your head chopped off or something like that. Perhaps Frame Graham could give me as a verified Jew could tell me the exact story. But basically, we have this game of shibboleths where, because the alt-right doesn't have hierarchy or not enough of it, it's this kind of hive mind. And so every 3 months there's a new shibboleth. So you have to be super hardcore. And, Daily Stormer Weave level stuff. Oh, and now actually we need to attack all e-thoughts and whatever. Oh, and now we're American nationalists. So it just keeps flipping, and it's contradictory. And they are these like weird purity spirals or shibboleth games. And I mean, look, I get it. Sometimes these things are useful, but it's overall, I think, a generally bad trend.
So I have been, I've been sort of on record as criticizing Pat Little because, I think a lot of people imagine the Vanguard as, when they hear Vanguard, it needs to be this hard edge. It's all about the 1488 and things like that. And I hear Pat Little, and he's not even pro-white. He's just anti-Jew. I mean, when I hear his platform, I mean, he has positions about, I think I heard you might actually like this one, but the idea of giving reparations to blacks, and it's like, so what we're going to do is we're going to play the Democrats game where they mobilize minority support, but with an anti-white narrative, scapegoating whites, and we're just going to flip the script and scapegoat Jews.
Well,
and
it was
the multiculturalists now.
Yeah. Well, look, I actually, that was the one thing about his campaign that I praised. I thought the just endless kind of Alex Jones like Jew hating was just, it was just grating. I mean, it alienated me. For what it's worth. I'm not, and I've published Kevin McDonald. I've had Kevin McDonald speak at 3 or 4 conferences of mine. I mean, I obviously take this issue very seriously, but just this, it is not what I want to hear. I do want to hear something that is visionary and positive. There can be some negativity thrown in the mix, but when it's just this kind of endless rant about Jewish supremacism and the evils of Zionism, I just tune out at some point, to be honest. But I think the outside the box stuff, like we're going to end aid to Israel and then we're going to give that money to the blacks for one-time reparations. It was so kind of nutty that I kind of liked it. I have to say, we should be outside the box a little. We should kind of try stuff. I won't criticize him for that, actually.
Okay. Well, see, I mean, my thing is just, the media, when the media calls people Nazis, I mean, they go all the way even to calling Mitt Romney a Nazi, right? And they discredit themselves when they do it. But when we present people who the public, rightly or wrongly, interprets, could plausibly go, you know what, maybe, I mean,
right.
That does damage. Like, that gives them ammunition, and I don't know why we would give them ammunition. Like, in 2018, people aren't ready to hear what Patrick Little is selling, in my opinion.
Are we ever going to be ready to hear that? Like, do we want to hear that in 2040 when we're all red-pilled? Is that actually a good message? What was, and again, I think trolling can be fun, but is tweeting out, like a picture of you're running for Congress and you're tweeting out an image of who is that terrible new princess we have, so-called. I'm forgetting her name. She's this mulatto American woman.
Oh, Meghan Markle.
Tweeting her out. I mean, look, if you do that as like a 19-year-old kid who's anonymous in college, yeah, that's hilarious. But it's just kind of like, dude, you're 50 or something,
yeah,
just
right.
Again, I think we should be fun. We should be a little risque and kind of, push the envelope. But when there's like nothing else beyond that, it becomes it ironically becomes a kind of TRS running for president. And
yeah.
So
I guess this sort of brings us, to one of our main topics for tonight, which is strategy and how we move forward, right? And so Frame had just done a show last night on JF where he walked through his ideas of where white identity politics needs to go from here. And I'd really like to hear the two of you have a dialogue around your guys' thoughts. I'm sure both of you have thought a lot about this. So Frame, if you want to sort of bring the audience up to speed on your discussion last night?
Sure. So, my interest in this is really about identity politics. I mean, part of what has, the work that I've done, is really sort of focused on that particular thing more than anything. Like I'm not an ethno-state guy. I don't, my interest is, I wanted to protect basic things like meritocracy and science and debate and reason and a lot of things that I found that in order to protect them because of the social justice really mob mentality against them, calling them as being white or white informed, that in order to defend basic values that I think would help everybody, black, white, Hispanic, Jewish, whatever, I had to defend white people and whiteness explicitly. And so that is sort of one of the founding, the sort of principles of the philosophy that I put forward. And so the ideas that I mentioned yesterday on JF Stream are really intended to create the infrastructure to normalize identity politics for people who identify as or would like to be allies to Eurocentric values, or at least the values that are attacked as being Eurocentric by what is increasingly now the mainstream of society. And so in order to really sort of pinpoint that, as Richard said, we need to be honest about what the state of the world is right now. And to the extent that people are, think that it's blackpilling to say that, to point out all of the pressure on being white, as people who are following this, likely know in detail. I think that people really need to start small and really understand how the modern diversity industry emerged as it did, and begin to organize and get in the same game. So whether you're talking about Jewish identity politics, which I've done a number of lectures on, from the inside and really more as a whistleblower, whether you're talking about LGBT identity politics or Black identity politics or increasingly Hispanic, there is a commonality to that infrastructure, which has not been set up by people who are allies to European identity, that I believe is critical to, if not mimic, to at least have some of the basics covered, right? In terms of what the organizations generally are doing, how they're structured, what their messaging is like, what kind of activities they participate in, and then how different nodes in the network relate to one another. So before I go over it, I guess in sort of concise but brief detail, can I ask, Richard, did you see that? Did people in the chat, did you see that?
Yes, I actually listened to most of that live stream, actually.
Okay. And by the way, Brundle, as a quick note, I see that you don't have Super Chat, but I don't know, a lot of people in the chat are asking for some interactivity. I don't know if you have Streamlabs.
I have Streamlabs, and I will.
I don't see it in the description. Oh, there it is. Support show. Okay, sorry, my bad. Just trying to be respectful.
Streamlabs is in the description. Please donate. Please support the cause. I got to pay for a hotel room tonight, so.
Perhaps I should pay for that hotel room.
Well, you've brought enough viewers. This will help. So okay. You guys go on.
All right. So for those who didn't see it, and it was a long talk there, the basic idea is to start very small and to start with, to pretend, close your eyes and pretend for a second that, it's not a political ideology, but it's something like communism was in the 1950s or 60s. Now, the centrist political view is that if you disagree with communism, the best way to fight speech is with more speech, that you should be able to defeat it in a debate. And then there are people who, people commonly use the analogy of ISIS. Like, well, what if you had a group whose ideology was so toxic that they were effectively terrorist groups? And would you give them a platform for speaking as if they were terrorists? And it's one thing to not give a platform to somebody. It's another thing to treat them as a criminal organization, even when they explicitly disavow violence, they explicitly disavow any sort of terrorist activity. But you have websites that get taken off the internet, as Richard has experienced, as a number of people did. Cut off from PayPal, Airbnb, dating websites. I mean, just 1984 style unpersoning for people who are expressing beliefs, disavowing violence, disavowing any of that stuff. So you need to really take as your starting point the fact that what has become the mainstream now treats a peaceful ideology as if it is a terrorist organization. And when you look at how SJW sort of racial communist politics really seeped into the mainstream, it did that despite being subject to many of the same forces that the contemporary nationalist right wing is subject to. And a good example of that is the state of California, and what is a pretty amazing phenomenon happening right now, which is that the lawsuits against big tech are all being filed in California. And a lot of people are really surprised by that. Like, why would you, of all the jurisdictions to bring such a suit in? It's because California has a really unique law in place which protects discrimination on the basis of political views. And for people who, are well aware that California is the most progressive state in the union, why would it have this law in the books that would seem to uniquely protect people in right-wing philosophies that are hated by big tech and such? It's because those laws were put in place in the 1950s and 60s to protect communists who are treated as domestic terrorists, essentially, and being blackballed from making a livelihood and things like that. But the way that it grew was neighborhood by neighborhood. And rather than thinking big and national, thinking translocal and small but connected. And so the emphasis there was, rather than trying to persuade people who might view you as one might view ISIS or something, to concentrate on first and foremost looking at this as a professional thing. That this is, for the people who are leaders in the cause of simply wanting there to be white positivity rather than white toxicity taught in schools or cinema. That you should really do, first start out with targeted demographic. The first thing to do is to segment your audience, recognize who will support you, who is adjacent to you, who is, basically identifying the fertile soil and beginning to shore up infrastructure in such places before trying to make a big public push to normalize these things. Because unfortunately, the American principles, this might be subject to some mean reversion. I think some of the heat is off right now. But as recently as a couple months ago, when the heat gets hot, basic American principles about freedom of association drop away. And to always assume that is going to reappear. And so I put forth a number of ideas in that stream. Sorry, I'll stop talking.
Could I jump in? Well, I don't want to stop you because I'm enjoying the stream, but let me just give myself as an example. With the college tour, I felt like we were using the apparatus of the state, which includes the university systems, obviously, even the private ones, against itself. And so we were able to, ironically, dialectically use the government to promote our views. A similar case was in the media. And I think both of these things are actually flipping around, and I'm, readjusting. But, I was protected at Texas A&M. I was protected at Auburn. Both of those were great things. And normal students are coming out of curiosity and just, excitement of like, oh, what is this? This is driving people crazy. And things are working. What we have seen at Charlottesville was clearly the turning point. Remember, a month or 2 months before Charlottesville, we did a free speech rally and I didn't organize it. It was someone else named Colton, and he was just a libertarian guy. But we did a free speech rally. There were no injuries. Everything went well. We were using the apparatus of the state for our cause. Now, basically, the empire struck back, to sound a bit nerdy, and they figured it out. They cracked the nut. And what they were doing at Florida, and then definitely in Michigan, and that's why I called off the tour, was that they had figured out a way of cracking the nut. And that is that they would allow just enough violence. And so, similar in Charlottesville, where effectively they did not allow us to speak. They pushed us out onto Market Street. The government generated this violence. The Charlottesville police, the governor, issuing the state of emergency, the mayor. They generated a violent situation, a catastrophe, and then they threw up their hands and said, "Oh, look, the alt-right, they're a bunch of terrorists." Similarly in Florida and then in Michigan, they allowed just enough violence. So in Florida, they allowed the Antifa just to basically scare people outside from coming in, and then to stand up and scream at the top of their lungs to a point where a speech was impossible. And then at Michigan, a similar situation, everyone was afraid to come. 20,000 people watched the live stream. At Texas A&M, people were like pushing in through the doors. The normal people were scared off, and they basically allowed a controlled riot to take place in order to do this. So they protected me, they protected people on the inside, they created this. And so they cracked the nut. They made our speech impossible. And so I actually think we're in a very similar thing with deplatforming from PayPal, from Stripe, from hosting, from all of it. A couple of years ago, Silicon Valley was our friend. We were making inroads on Twitter. We were using these really amazing solutions to take web payments and all this kind of stuff. The empire is striking back, and things have actually dramatically changed, and we cannot continue to go on doing what we're doing. And I also totally agree that, I was doing this kind of like national or institutional strategy where we were, and the alt-right is as well. The alt-right is on the internet. And then I was going to a college, making public appearances doing this. And but we didn't have that local support. So we didn't have long time local activists willing to stand up for me. And so basically we were cut off at the knees, and it is what it is. I've certainly learned some things, but I also chafe a bit at people who kind of have like a revisionist view of it, and then it's like, oh yeah, see, we told you this doesn't work. No, it was working. We were winning federal court cases that allowed me to speak at Auburn. The establishment cracked the nut and was figured out a way to crush us. And so we're in a totally different position. It's depressing in a way, but this is life. The football team is the opposing side is going to figure out your quarterback. They're going to figure out your offense, and you have to change and evolve. That's where we are.
Was Charlottesville inevitable in the sense that?
Yes, I think it was inevitable in two different ways. First off, it was inevitable movement-wise. The amazing energy that led up to Charlottesville, including Charlottesville 1, where people who did not want to use their name exactly, and they might want to wear a hat and sunglasses or something like that, but were still willing to go to a public event, risk something, no question, and be there. that was a tremendous amount of energy, and we shocked people. That, those images of Charlottesville 1, Charlottesville 2, the Torchlight images, all that stuff, that was really profound. And then that was where the movement was going. And to be honest, a lot of these various battles of Berkeley and so on, there was a lot of excitement in Milo's college appearances. There was all this excitement of, oh wow, what's going to happen? Are the Antifa are going to come out? There was a titillation about the fact of going out there, risking something, facing down an enemy, screaming at them, getting screamed at. You might get maced. There was that. Yes, this was, the whole movement was moving in this direction of excitement, and non-violence, but excitement. There was something in the air. And so I think Charlottesville was inevitable. I think it was also inevitable that at some point the establishment was going to crack down on us, because we did have a feeling like we were winning. We were part of Trump. Even when we were criticizing Trump, we were getting talked about. We were dominating the mind space to an amazing degree. And at some point, the establishment is going to crack down on it. The establishment, we shouldn't overestimate their intelligence, but we shouldn't underestimate it either. They are on top for a reason, and they're battlers, and they can be ruthless.
Frame, what do you think about that? About Charlottesville being inevitable?
I'm not really sure what you mean by it.
That inevitably the establishment was going to find an opportunity to railroad everybody.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that, and especially as something of an outside observer with respect to, like I didn't attend that event. I was, for me, there's something of like a ACLU sort of principles first sort of aspect of this that I look at with respect to, the identity politics prong. And Charlottesville, there are a lot of things about it that, it's not, that's not my thing. And with respect to, here's what I'll address. I'll pretend that what you are really asking here is a violent, forceful response, or if at least not violence, the enabling of violence in order to adapt to the winning of the war of ideas by nationalist right-wing idea. Is that inevitable? And I would say, with respect to the current state of things, it is, but that doesn't mean it has to be that way in the decade and 2 decades to come. What we're really talking about right now, and by the way, this is not a new phenomenon. For those who are students of history, as early as the 1930s, you had New York State judges who made private agreements along with the New York prosecutors not to prosecute gangs. Like if you look at the Meyer-Lansky gang, there was a movement then. And this is, during the rise of the Nazis. This was 1936, actually, is when this sort of famously happened. But there were agreements not to prosecute these gangs that would go into the street and conduct physical violence against people who sympathized with the German regime. This is before the U.S. entered World War II, right? This is in the period, between 1933 and 1941. And what this was the normalization of political violence. And you can obviously in retrospect, knowing what we know about history, you can make a lot of reasons for and against that, depending on whether or not you are a means justify the ends person, or how much you want to stick to basic American principles, which Richard ignited a national debate about, with the sort of, is it okay to punch a Nazi? Forgetting whether or not the person's a Nazi. The person, for me, the interest is, look, I just want to protect basic American values. And to do that, I find that I need to be positive about white people. And to do that means you get a substantial portion of the population will call you a Nazi, even if you're proudly Jewish. It doesn't matter. So I'm sorry. The point that I'm building towards is that this normalization of political violence through the state apparatus has existed for 100 years. And to think that it's different now, being more far removed from our founding than before is silly, right? I mean, this is the reason that George Soros has been in recent years has made a huge push to purchase local district attorneys, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than funding these big national campaigns. What he does is he goes to Miami, he goes to Minneapolis, he goes to Philadelphia, and he puts millions of dollars into local DA campaigns. And what that does is that buys local law enforcement. And what that gives you is control over discretion. It gives you control over local politics and how the law is prosecuted. That allows you to get away with a lot of stuff. It allows you to cover your tracks. It allows you to really crack down on your enemies. So this kind of neighborhood by neighborhood fight, and to really look at, in my view, really the fight for sort of legal and cultural equality. Although I know a lot of people, in this segment of philosophy have different ways to look at that. What it does is it really looks at things as a topographical map and trying to base strategy on the map the way it is, not the way you want it to be, and not treating all jurisdictions as being uniform. Go where the iron is hot, consolidate your power there, and then move on to the next one.
So what is and I want to ask both of you this, I guess I'll go to Richard first. What does the 5-year plan look like? Is there a long-term plan? How long of a time horizon are we looking at? I mean, what should we be doing now to reach that?
Well, I can tell you what I'm doing and what I, therefore think is necessary. Before this, rupture with Donald Trump in 2015 and 2016, the alt-right was a thing, even if we weren't always calling ourselves that. And we produced papers, we produced blogs, we produced podcasts, we produced books, we produced art even to a small degree. And so there was a culture, and it was, you could say, introspective. It certainly was not in the public mind space, but it was what it was, and I was certainly part of that. I was in a way willing to go through my whole life in that and basically on the fringe and not really entering the mainstream. With Trump, there was this miraculous moment where we were able to do it. And so, I think in some ways, like with me, because of the just rabid deplatforming, even those kind of small things that we did, like hosting a conference. Basically, the last year, the Ronald Reagan Building dragged its feet to a point that I could not host a sequel. I had hosted many conferences before, 2011, 2013, 2015, 2016, and some small ones in between. They basically prevented us from doing that. We hosted a conference in a secure, though totally private venue. That got scuttled. I mean, even those small things that we were doing were being attacked. And so I think the first step is to rebuild a foundation. I think to a very large degree in 2017, I was just pushing. It's like a blitzkrieg, pardon the analogy, but you find this pressure point and you just send everything through it, and you keep trying to get a breakthrough. Well, sometimes you get caught on the other side. And so we need to rebuild these institutions that we had, and that actually is harder now. So I think that's the first thing. The other thing is that I think we need a major network of really top quality people. And that is not going to be something that is forward facing. And I have actually, in a way, also learned that through 2017. We have to have networks that are not going out and doing stuff, including activism publicly, and that are not advertising themselves and so on. Because we need to have support groups, and we need to also recognize that real masters of the universe types, they're not going to be caught dead going to an MPI conference or an AmRen conference or something like that. They're not going to be caught dead or holding up a sign outside of a building that says white rights now. They have way, way too much to lose to do that. And you know, we have to build up a better network with those people. So those are things that I'm doing. You know, again, a lot of it's just keep on keeping on. We need to rebuild what we had, but then we need to expand later. I don't think that we're going to have another, you know, 2015, 2016. I think this goes back to what I was talking about before. I don't think we're going to ever be like, just feel this winning feeling. Amazing. We're just winning. Oh, the cucks are getting nailed. We're winning. We're not going to probably feel that for a little while. It's going to be hard, actually. There's going to be more blackpilling. There's going to be more infighting and drama. Because these things happen paradigmatically. Like if you think about it, there was 9/11 and the Iraq War. And everyone was talking about that and thinking about that, and informed effectively everything about politics, about culture, and so on. Then we had the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. For years, that informed politics and culture and so on. Trump, another rupture occurred. These happened in these 5 to 7 year periods. That is kind of over. And we need to wait patiently for another rupture. And we absolutely cannot predict what that is going to be. It might very well be a stock market crash. I think we're certainly due for one. It might be something else. It might be an insurgent campaign like Trump. It might be something that I could not imagine because, you know, God knows, in 2014, if someone told me that you would be supporting Donald Trump for president and that the alt-right would be considered his vanguard and you would be usurping the conservative movement, I would be like, is this something out of Dungeons and Dragons? Like, what are you? No, that could never possibly happen. It did. Yeah. And so we actually do need to be a bit patient for the next rupture. And it's going to actually, I will warn everyone, it's going to actually feel like losing. But it's not. It's patience and waiting.
Frame, what do you see as the 5-year?
Oh, I'll say also, look, we real quick, I don't mean to interrupt. We do have to have the big picture. And that big picture fundamentally is an ethno-state. Theodor Herzl was willing to dream the dream and it became a reality. Now, the ethno-state is absolutely not going to emerge next Tuesday, but there has to be a vision. The left always has this grand, impossible vision, something that can never be fulfilled. And that is actually good. That is motivating. If we actually say our vision is we want to win the midterms or whatever, that's stupid. We might actually accomplish that. That's terrible. It's a bad goal. We need to have a big, grand design moving forward. I think that's something that conservatism has always lacked, and that's something that I have always stressed in the alt-right. It's a dream.
Trey?
Yeah, so Richard and I obviously have very different visions of the world that we're trying to build, and for me, I think a lot of the people who follow me in my content and sort of thoughts on this, to the extent there's overlap, it relates to the fact that, sort of the foundational principle of it being okay to be European descent and to not be a second-class citizen under the law or in culture, or to, put your kids through elementary school where they learn that that they have unearned privilege and whatnot. There is that early, foundational principle of being proud of your heritage that we share. But obviously, I'm going to cater my remarks towards my own sort of vision of the world, which is So I'll answer this question about the 5-year plan, with that in mind. And for those who are either new to my material here, or for those just kind of stumbling upon this video in the future, I really see things as going in a more futuristic direction with respect to racial identity, when genetic engineering begins to become mainstreamed the same way the internet was. And I believe that is going to make race it's going to change it from being an immutable characteristic. And many of the tribal the tribal conflicts that are so endemic to ethnic conflicts throughout history are going to change in a very radical way once race is no longer an immutable characteristic. For example, it was only in our lifetime that gender stopped becoming an immutable characteristic. We are already at the early stages now of that happening with respect to race, and I think once it's not an immutable characteristic, a lot of what many identitarians conceive of as sort of the necessity of racial identity is going to become fluid in a way I don't think people appreciate yet. And especially when you combine that with artificial intelligence and a lot of the changes that are going to happen in the next 20 to 40 years in tandem with the demographic changes. For that reason, among others, I take a very big tent philosophy to all of this stuff. And it's one of the reasons that, not to sound like cuckish here, but like there are a lot of, I get a lot of messages and call-ins from people who are Hispanic and Jewish and Black who message me and say, listen, I want to be an ally to this, but I don't know what to do because I can't even, as a Black guy, I can't even support white identity. The 5-year plan, as I see it, is there are two things that are happening. One is sort of the duck aspect of things, that you are looking calm and placid above water, but you are paddling furiously underneath. Richard framed this as being patient and waiting, which is I think that is what the public perception should be. I think beforehand, really what you're doing is the work of the next 12 to 24 months is the construction of translocal infrastructure. And even if it is at a relatively amateur level, even if it's just people having fun on weekends, the people in place in different jurisdictions who are beginning to do community relationship building, so that there are, the concept of the Community Relations Council is absolutely bedrock in modern community organizing. I dare you to find me a single identity group, whether or not it's Pan-Asian or Black or Jewish or whatnot, that does not have full-time professionals dedicated to community relations. And that is something that is easy to do, or at least it's not impossible to do, because so much of it can be done without explicit identitarian tie-ins. So much of it is basic, and it helps you in life anyway. Like, you're not throwing your life away and doxing yourself and dying for a noble cause just to do a favor for somebody who's in your local police force, or who's on a local school board or something, so that you can begin to develop relations. There's Yuri Bezmenov has a lot of talks on subversive strategies of in the Soviet era, and he talks about the concept of sleeper cells, which can spring into place. And I don't mean to put it in that sort of frame, but I do think. But the thing is, if you can get past the ugly sort of cockroach, like scampering from the sunlight, pain to personal pride from that, there's a tremendous amount of gain to be had there, which is in thinking about things, pretending that you are communists in the 1950s. I mean, imagine there being a giant. Imagine Charlottesville was hosted by communists in the 1950s, all out there in public, all talking about world revolution now, and doing the same sort of slogans about, anti-white, white privilege and all this stuff, back when there was the infrastructure in the 1950s with the National Legion of Decency and all the other checks and balances that, for all their flaws, did keep a lid on some of this identity politics we see now. They couldn't get away with that in the 1950s, and it's silly to think that that is, it's tempting to think that is the way to move forward at this moment, because people of European heritage are the majority. They're the majority of, demographically, they're the majority of aggregate wealth, even if they're not in the top 5 ethnicities. They're the majority of presidents, of congressmen. And so there's this temptation to sort of like walk into Mordor, so to speak. But one does not simply do that. Like in the same way that that communists didn't simply do that in the 1950s. But now here we are, in a world where communists are allowed on PayPal, communists are allowed on Bumble, and they're allowed to run Google's trusted flagger programs and all that.
Right.
But at the same time, even to this day, with all their institutional power, which totally dwarfs that of the national right, you would not be caught dead espousing communism as a mainstream. There's always a layer in between, right? And one of the things that I have seen as an impediment to scaling power with respect to the identity politics we're talking about on this stream is to have the humility to put blocker layers in place so that there are things going on in private and there are things going on in public, and there are and that the real leaders on the ground are aware of, have one eye on each side, but are taking the necessary actions to do the private infrastructure and letting and setting up that essential infrastructure before waging the normalization campaign.
Look, the way that you describe this, long subversion, I think is accurate, and also the strategy you're putting forward is a good one. But I would say a couple of things here. First off, you're right. The revolutionary Maoist Trotskyite party has never won a seat in Congress or in any parliament in Europe, yet they did. They won seats in academia and Hollywood and Wall Street, and that's much more important. And the mainstream right, actually to their detriment, have always focused on elections. Even Pat Buchanan noted in one of his very early books, right victory, or it might have been like some metaphor effectively of right winning battles and the left winning the wars. What rights keep winning more and more elections, and the left keeps changing the culture more and more. Don't you think that one of the reasons why this subversion has been possible is that it was flowing in the direction of society in general? I mean, the 1950s, we might look back on it now as this, bastion of fascism or something, but it simply was not, right. In terms of its intellectual culture and so on. After all, it was immediately followed, if it did not give birth to, the 1960s and 70s, which set this paradigm which we're still living in. The other thing that I would add is that one of the major detriments to promoting our cause has been this just extreme immune system of the conservative movement. And, I was actually tweeting a little bit about this today because I was getting into a respectful, argument with someone who was putting forth similar ideas. And look, you can be an evolution denier. You can believe that the world is 4,000 years old. You can believe in Alex Jones conspiracy theories. You can just, on and on. And I now includes you can be a transsexual and you can still be a Republican, and they will apologize for you. They will support you. And if you can win, you have a seat at the table. The moment you cross over from build the wall to it's okay to be white is the moment that you are ruthlessly purged from these organizations. And that does not happen on the left. Sam Francis noted this asymmetry between left and right, where the left, the leadership is always to the left of the constituents. So the leadership is always more radical, more Marxian, more whatever. And the constituents are kind of normal, guys who just want healthcare and jobs and so on. But on the right, the establishment is to the left again of the constituents. So if we put up for a vote, a referendum, do you want to end all immigration tomorrow morning? It might very well win. and at least among conservatives, like they are pretty rock ribbed. And as much as I am not a fan of democracy or popular sovereignty, I will say that if we held just a referendum on these crucial issues among normal white people, we would win. I mean, there was actually an interesting poll where it came out where they did a poll. Do you support the alt-right? And I think, and it might have been after Charlottesville, or maybe it was before, but we got 6 or 7.
Yeah, 9%.
Okay, 9%, a little bit higher. Okay, and everyone is, and again, the kind of like Nick Fuentes types would be like, "See, this is why you're a failure." Well, 9%. Holy shit, it's pretty good. Like, this is a vanguard movement that has that support. But all of the headlines of those liberal hand-wringing articles, and again, that was one poll, so we should keep that in perspective as well. But anyway, all of the headlines of those articles was Republicans, only 9% of Republicans support the alt-right, but 50% effectively support it. They just don't use the term. And
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, and this is remarkable. But again, so look, there's a lot of material to work with here. But I would just say that the problem with this is going into the conservative movement. The second, and I know this from personal experience, actually, my firing from the American Conservative. But I also know this just from a whole host of different people. The moment you cross that line, or they think that you're on the other side of that line, is the moment you are purged. Conservatives are generally, professional conservatives aren't that bright, to be honest. But one thing they are good at is that they have a very strong immune system. And what I fear is that you would have, trying to infiltrate that, you are going to have to really keep your head down. Really keep your head down. And whether you can actually help us, or actually promote our ideas remains to be seen. I know people in the conservative movement who hold my exact views. I don't see them helping me a great deal, to be frank. So we need to be skeptical of these kinds of things. And, one of the conclusions I have come to, in a way reluctantly, I mean, I get it that the shortest distance between 2 points is to subvert an existing institution. I am not sure we can really do that with the conservative movement, the Republican Party. I have, and again, I would say that a bit of a caveat here. I'm thinking through this myself, so this is not a firm conviction of mine. It's something that I'm thinking through. But I do think we might very well. We clearly need implicit, secret, networks, much like early Christians were meeting in people's, dining rooms or barns and things like that and getting together. We absolutely need that. We need more of that. But we might very well need a real political apparatus that is ours, in which we can enforce discipline and in which we can set an explicit agenda. And this is something that I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not absolutely convinced of. But I do think that it is most likely necessary. And I don't think that merely putting forth patriotism or trying to go work in the conservative movement, I just simply don't think that is going to work.
Yeah. So, what you're identifying, I think dovetails into the sort of 5-year, look forward that Brundle asked us our opinions on. And you mentioned the immune system, and I'm reminded of Barry Goldwater in 1964 and the birth of the neoconservative movement. So, the GOP, radically changed in the wake of Goldwater's historic defeat in 1964. Barry Goldwater, was one of the very, 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 very few people who refused to sign the 1964 civil rights legislation. That regardless of whether or not you think it's net good or net bad, depending on what your political views are coming into this, it did lay the groundwork for the commercialization of identity politics, and Barry Goldwater was a presidential candidate who didn't sign it. He was against it.
Right.
And I don't think there's been a Republican since 1964 who said that they disagreed with the 1964 civil rights law. But what happened was there was a crisis moment. After that, the party risked becoming the Whig Party, right? It risked extinction because of how badly they got defeated, and they turned to neoconservatism in the wake of that crisis. And so,
well, they turned to Nixon first,
right?
And
true.
Nixon's a pretty ambiguous figure, to be honest. Nixon developed affirmative action. At the same time, he ran a pretty Trumpian campaign, actually. The law and order stuff, the Southern strategy. It's an interesting case. And Goldwater himself did not oppose, at least explicitly, did not oppose the civil rights legislation for racialist reasons. He opposed them through libertarianism,
right,
and so on. So it's a little bit more of an ambiguous story,
right? No, I agree. I mean, I agree with that assessment of things. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, even that libertarianism, which I think through history is sort of conceived of as sort of implicit white identity, right, if not explicit. I think that there was. I mean, do you agree that that post Goldwater there was a reconceptualizing of what the direction of conservatism was, or do you not think that was sort of like a crisis moment?
I think that was definitely a reconceptualizing. I mean, in 1955, the Buckleyite Project was to fusionism, as it was called. It was marrying this libertarianism that certainly preexisted the mid-century with Cold War, hardcore Cold War, better dead than red, roll back the Soviet Union style foreign policy. Goldwater was their candidate. 10 years after the founding of National Review, they got him. It was almost like, I ran for president 10 years after alt-right or whatever. It was like this guy was a fierce individualist in libertarianism, yet he was wanted to, send the Soviets back to the Stone Age and bomb the hell out of Vietnam and all that kind of stuff. It was a remarkable thing. That definitely set the paradigm going forward for conservatism, because that is conservative ideology, is right, hawkish on foreign policy, and then a kind of pretense of libertarianism or big business. Basically, that is a Republican ideology. So yeah, I agree it was paradigm changing. At the same time, demographically speaking, the paradigm change was the Southern strategy. So again, Contra Ann Coulter, I should mention, who has a book called Mugged, which includes a lot of revisionist history about how the Republicans were always non-racist. Contra Ann Coulter. The paradigm shift in terms of demographic was that emerging Republican majority, that idea that all of those Southern people were going to be brought in a way on culture war issues. So they were going to give up on the civil rights legislation, but they were going to bring in all of these Southern voters on more or less culture war stuff, that they were going to wink and nod about race, about Christianity, and they could kind of marry that with the, with the general, kind of traditional values, and with anti-communist foreign policy. Then, later on, after the fall of the Soviet Union, they kind of were searching for something throughout the 2000s, and they found it after 9/11, with basically Osama bin Laden replacing Karl Marx, I guess, as the big bad enemy. I think for a little while there, it's things have kind of flipped now, where you have liberals sounding like Buckleyite conservatives attacking Russia. Interestingly, but we don't have to go down that that trail right this moment. But yeah, I more or less agree that was the new paradigm that invented conservatism as we know it. Libertarianism, hardcore foreign policy, and Christianity, but to be honest, a lot of race baiting. Thrown in the mix. So there's the religious right that kind of came in later. It was developed in the 70s. Sorry, I'm talking too much. That came in the 80s, but it was that race baiting was actually the central electoral strategy. It wasn't new with Trump, and the liberals are right, and the conservatives are wrong when they deny it. Like Ann Coulter, I mean, I love Ann Coulter. I'm doing friendly criticism, but the race baiting was the electoral strategy of the Republican Party. The Willie Horton stuff, law and order, we know what they were talking about. It was dog whistling, and they're still doing it. I think it was interesting. The Republican parties are almost they're libertarians who pretend to be nationalists to get elected and will dog whistle. You had a David Duke phenomenon in the early 90s where you had a racial nationalist pretending to be a libertarian. And it was an interesting moment. But anyway, that is still the paradigm. I mean, the Republican Party, if it is going to win, it's going to win through whites. I mean, we can call it the Saylor strategy if you want. I mean, I would call it the Sam Francis strategy. He talked about this explicitly, but it's the strategy. It's a description of Republican politics. And I don't know when that's going to quite change. Explicitly white or colorblind or even anti-white in a way, and implicitly pro-white.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Brundle, do you need to jump in with Streamlabs or before?
Yeah, that's what I was about to do. So, David Clark, $5. Thanks for hosting this stream. 3x4 architecture, $5. Richard, when is the Nietzsche article coming out?
Oh, I'll release that definitely by the end of the week. I was actually editing it. Yeah, I mentioned this on another stream. I have this really great Nietzsche article that I wrote 10 years ago on Nietzsche's concept of Europe, Nietzsche's ethnostate, actually. And it's pretty academic, but I'm going to release it, and you'll get it soon. It's long. Footnoted.
Okay, great. Where's that going to be? Is that going to be on altright.com?
No, I'll put that on altright.com and Radix, yeah.
Okay, great. Uncle Shlomo, $8. I was forced out of the Proud Boys for treating the alt-right as an ally rather than an enemy. I was told to go join the alt-right if I loved it so much, who obviously in turn told me to go join the alt-light because I'm Jewish. F this infighting, unite the right, win.
That's an interesting story.
Yeah. Richard, what is your thought on Jewish allies to the alt-right?
I don't think we should ever push away an ally. If someone is doing good work like Frame Game, I keep saying Frame Game, it's a tongue twister. The last thing we should do is stop them or say, you're a Jew. I get it. I think part of being alt-right is Jewish awareness and seriousness about that question, and not, like conservatives, like blind Jewish worship or total lack of awareness. I think we are aware and critically aware. But if someone is doing good work, if someone is helping us, if we can learn from them, then the last thing we should do is push them away. That being said, this is a movement for us. And I don't think we should ever give up on that. This is not a movement for the concept of free association. This is not a movement for liberty or something. This is for us. And I also think we should have organizations that are for us, for ourselves alone. But I am more than happy to, have a conversation, or, if Frame Game and I are ever in the same city, break bread together. I'm more than happy to do that with Jewish allies or allies of color even. But we just need to have, this at the same time, this is about us at the end of the day. Yeah.
Great answer. So, Boston Free Speech, $2. All speech is free speech. Go to bostonfreespeech.org. All right, so that wraps it up for the Streamlabs. Frame, did you have anything you wanted to address about what Richard had said before I read the super chats?
Yes, I do. I'm just going to address the last thing that Richard said, which is something that I told Greg Johnson and a number of other folks on prior streams, which is that, I see us as being in two different movements, that have some commonality and, would you and the analogy I gave was like, would you consider, paleo conservatism and like libertarianism to be like the same movement? And the answer is that there's sort of like a Venn diagram where there's some overlap, and some of that is sort of based on time and temporary dynamics or whatnot. But anyway, I just want to kind of clarify that so that there's kind of this fear about subverting movements and things like that. But I've never identified as a white nationalist and whatnot. I talk about sort of positivity and the heart right, and so to the extent that those have different implications, I call those different movements. But it's also a bedrock principle that people should be allowed to talk to people. I mean, so anyway, but let me just go back to what Richard had said.
We should, maybe not right now, maybe at the end of the stream, we should go back to some of these rather provocative things you were saying about ethnicity vanishing and gender vanishing. But
yeah,
before we do that, we can go to the more immediate issue.
Sure. So I think the immediate one was it was still about the 5-year projection, and this idea of that Richard mentioned of whiteness in the Republican Party. And, he mentioned the sort of 9% of having, views that were sympathetic to the alt-right. But there's also this other really important statistic to keep in mind, which is that a recent poll, that was, I forget who conducted it, but I just sent Brundle the link, said that 55% of Americans feel like they're discriminated against because they're white. And this was covered by NPR, by the Washington Post, by Time Magazine. It was a big poll. So you have these two different points on the one side. You have, and that 9% thing was also just asking whether or not they thought these views were okay or sensible, not that they explicitly self-identified as alt-right. So that is something to keep in mind. Maybe Richard was citing a different quote, different poll, but that's the one I was referring to. But then you also have 55% of Americans who have a degree of consciousness about their ethnic or racial background and feel like they are being discriminated against. And that is fertile soil for, that's the first step really for organization is a problem to solve. And what's happening right now that Richard identified about the Republican Party is that it has a very, very strong immune system, and nothing has been able to, despite all the demographic change, despite all of the growth of the diversity industry, despite all of that, that has seemed to have the effect of hardening the backbone of the Republican Party rather than softening it. And in fact, that was the immigration policy before Trump, right? I mean, it was a done deal that, it was just the Gang of Eight. It was all, just how much are we going to concede? The idea of not conceding at all wasn't even in the national conversation. But I think the 5-year projection, obviously, it's active waiting in terms of construction of infrastructure, but it's also about being in position to take advantage of lightning rods like another Trump moment. And I think that there are at least 3 on the near horizon, absent something temporary. So one is the 2020 election, which is going to be extremely contentious.
Wild, yeah.
And not only that, it will be contentious on racial grounds. The number one thing they're going to hit him with is the racist card. Like, no matter what, all this Russia stuff is going to suddenly die down because they're going to need to focus fire on calling him a racist so that they can shore up support with the sort of POC coalition, which is so bedrock now to DNC victories. there's some really interesting polling data that suggests that white liberals between the ages of 18 to 35 have moved something like 8 points to the right in the past 2 years. This was something that was my white pill of the day in a stream I did last week, and it's important to keep in mind there is this phenomenon.
What happened?
Let me pull up the exact thing on it, but it was white liberals between the ages of 18 and 35 moving considerably to the right. I'll pull up a link after I'm done talking, so that Brundle can share it and you can see it. But this idea of the Republican Party being filled more and more with white people or white allies, and the POC coalition becoming more and more explicitly identity politics driven, I think is going to create, if not directly, then indirectly, like a number of real lightning rod moments that will create national conversation about race, where having thought leaders in place, having platforms in place to expound on these issues intellectually is going to be like a functional necessity. So there's a 2020 election. You've got the turning Texas blue, which is really going to be a moment in history for America. That is slated to occur between 2024 and 2028. Something like 95% of new people, people under the ages of 18 coming to Texas have been Hispanic in the past decade. It's really happening fast. And once that turns, the national conversation is going to be, well, it turned because it became Hispanic. And that is that's what, like 30 some electoral votes. That is going to create a facelift of Republican power. I think that's going to be the Goldwater moment of the Republican Party, where it's going to need to go in one of two directions fairly radically. I think it's instructive to note that other than Trump, most of the main Republican candidates were Hispanic. You had Rubio, Cruz, and Bush.
Jeb.
Jeb. Exclamation points on the other side. And that, when you combine that with a populace that is already beginning to feel discriminated against, and especially if there's an economic contraction simultaneously, you could see a lot of people who are kicked out of comfort, demanding representation. Their kids, they're going to be pissed off, and then hear at the dinner table about how their kids are being taught white privilege. Meanwhile, they're going to know damn well that their neighbors are not having to, they're getting a leg up every which way. It's unsustainable in economic contraction to have a diversity industry the size that it does, right? I mean, you've got the recent data coming out of University of Michigan that single university is spending $11 million a year on diversity. Their vice provost is pulling down $285,000 a year, just to bring in more non-white people. I mean, these kinds of positions only exist in a quasi Weimar state of luxury and decadence.
Yeah.
And that does not last forever. And the question is, when that crisis moment comes, do you have enough infrastructure in place to get that critical momentum? And that's something that people in nationalist philosophies in America had coming into January of 2017, and will have again as the cresting of more waves come in the next 5 to 8 years. But it's very important to be good now so that you can be lucky later.
Okay, I agree with a ton of what you said. I mean, don't you think that the say 2024, maybe even 2020, but 2024 or 2028, when Texas is just royal blue and nothing can be done, that you're saying that the Republican Party might change? I mean, some of these organizations, these big organizations, can't change. There are actually corporations that go under, big, massive, invincible steel companies, or, more recently BlackBerry or something like that, that just, they cannot change because the generals are fighting the last war. The CEO and so on are dealing with the old market, and there actually is a tremendous amount of sclerosis or inertia. They just cannot change. It seems like, what the way that I described it is that some people in the alt-right think that like the GOP as the implicit white person's party and as dog whistly and quasi racialist or whatever, that's like some new thing. No, that is a long-term continuation of how the Republican Party has won elections. And if that is no longer possible, I think the Republican Party might very well go out of business. I mean, parties come and go. They have died before. They will die again. And what actually happens next, I think, is a fascinating question. Will there be the party of the ascendant? The kind of POC type people who don't actually, weirdly, don't actually care a lot about the kind of Bernie-like issues, socialized medicine, income inequality, and so on. And that they'll be their party. There might even be a new left party. What comes out of this, there might very well be a true white person's party, and it's going to have a little bit of a different color, so to speak, than the Republican Party of old. It might actually kind of make peace with multiculturalism and say that, no, we're good white Christians. We want a seat at this table. We're okay with you if you're okay with us, kind of thing. I don't know. All of these things are possibilities, and I can't quite predict them. But I'm not sure that losing Texas is going to therefore revitalize the GOP. I think the GOP is going to go under.
Oh, well, yeah, right. Oh, I certainly don't mean to say therefore.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the main intention of it was to point to crestings of the wave, and then
Won't we need to be more explicit? I mean, it's kind of like that old paradigm of the implicit white party is going to cease working, and therefore it will be dropped. I mean, if the Republican Party will want to survive, then they'll just be like, oh yeah, handouts for Hispanics, more immigration. We need to win. They want to do this anyway. They want to do this now. Many of them, if you look at the 2013, autopsy of the 2012 election, this is exactly what they want to do. There are many in Congress who want an amnesty before the midterms of 2018. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it seems like that seems a far more likely thing. If anything would arise out of that shipwreck of Texas going blue, it might actually be something more explicit.
Right. Well, what it is a raising of the stakes so that there is a radical fork in the road at that point. But it's the same thing with a presidential election that's particularly critical. Like it was a radical fork in the road between Trump and Hillary.
Right.
In terms of making a 5-year projection about things, it's to recognize that at that moment when there's that fork, like sort of trying to leverage those things to scale the power of a particular movement that rides on its back, and to not necessarily be so public facing without having that wave running alongside of you. Like, I don't think that the entry into the national conversation of ideas that, are commonly associated with the alt-right, like that, there's a reason that happened in tandem with the Trump presidency. Right. And there are these moments where it will come again. And rather than necessarily thinking that trying to do that without the wave, I think is very difficult, because you are the singular point of focus. There's no, there's nothing else rising along with you, and it's very easy to just be sort of picked out and focused on.
I agree.
Well, listen, you identified earlier in the conversation that it was one of the first things you said. It was about the role of economic crises in all these things. I do not think an honest look of history can reveal anything other than that revolutions, of the kind of ideology that ideological revolutions are preceded by economic crises.
Right. 1789 followed a hyperinflation.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's interesting.
The first experiments with paper money, didn't go so well. Yeah.
As I was articulating that sentence, like I was in my head, I was actually thinking, but what about the French Revolution? Is one thing I'm not sure about that. But that's interesting. But look, the stock market is up 40% since Trump took office. That is astounding.
It's going to crash.
That seems to have an expiration date, does it? I mean,
exactly.
It's been 11 years since the last recession.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about economic, there's a new normal that's always established. So going down 40% from here will feel like a devastating crash, as opposed to, having stayed at, relatively the same level in a flat way. So just the perception of being in a loss. Actually, are you familiar with prospect?
When the boomer began to hate. Yeah, there will be 401k riots, actually. And in fact, the alt-right we will be seeking peace, whereas the boomers will become an elderly, violent terror organization, demanding reparations.
You're going to have a wheelchair drone army. Well, are you guys, Brundle and Richard, are you guys familiar with prospect theory by Kahneman and Tversky? It's like a sort of it's this bedrock game theory principle. I'll just send you a quick Wikipedia, so if you want to pull it up. But it's one of the foundational principles in like modern game theory. And what it says is that people are risk averse in the domain of gains and risk seeking in the domain of losses. And how you frame a problem or fact pattern will instantly change people's risk reward perception, depending on even with the same total expected utility. So I'll give you an example. Richard, I'm going to give you can pick A or B. A, I will, there's a 50-50 chance that you get $500. I'm sorry. I will give you $500. B is there's a 50-50 chance that you will get $0 or $1,000. So either I just give you the 500 or you need to do a 50-50 chance of 0 or 1,000. Which one do you take?
Yeah, it's hard not to take B.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Now, what happens when you escalate the magnitude there?
Right.
Richard, would you rather take $1 million, sure thing, or a 50-50 chance of $0 or $2 million?
Oh, definitely $1 million.
Right.
Yeah. A.
Okay. Yeah. Now we're going to.
I'll give you my PayPal address. I mean, now that this is a contract that we have just signed verbally, I will send you my PayPal Bitcoin if you want to.
So now I'm going to frame this in the negative. Okay. I have a gun to your head. Give me $500. I'm sorry. Give me $500 or flip a coin. That's A. B. Choice B is flip a coin. Either you pay me $0 if it's heads or $1,000 if it's tails. Which one do you do? The sure thing of paying me $500 or take a 50-50 chance of paying me $0 or $1,000?
Okay. With those two numbers, I might take the 50-50.
Okay.
Yeah.
500, 1,000,
Well, but that is what you would predict.
Right.
Because you are now risk seeking in the domain of loss.
Right.
Now, what happens?
If it escalates, it might change, though.
Well, no, if it escalates, it's going to be even more exaggerated. Right. Imagine this. I have a gun to your head. Here are your two choices. Give me $1 million or take a chance that you might have to pay me $2 million or a chance that you'll pay me $0.
Right. Or even more outlandish, like you give me $100,000 or there's a 50 chance that I shoot you or something. Or you don't. But I would give you that. If you said something, there's A is you pay me a large sum, like $100,000, or B, there's a 50-50 chance that you will die or live and owe me nothing. No question. Yeah.
That's what it's been extended to. But the basic premise here is what I just got you to do was to do the certain safe thing when I framed something with the same net utility, expected utility when you're dealing with getting something, but take the gamble if I framed it as you losing something, right? Mm-hmm. You would, and what this does is it says when the human mind perceives something as being in the domain of gains, they will be risk averse. And when they are in the domain of losses, they will be risk seeking.
Because we don't want to lose what we have. That's a primary kind of human emotion.
Right. There's something called the endowment effect, which basically creates like a exaggerated utility to something you already have, and loss aversion. Losses loom larger than gains. But this also explains the revolutionary spirit when you are that is emergent when you are perceived to be losing something, as opposed to when you are in good times and you have you have a lot to lose, and and the comfort effect, right? So, and what's really amazing about this is you can play with the numbers and you can create situations where people become risk seeking even when the expected utility is radically the other way. So, like, I could probably get you to pay me $1,000 just to just take $100,000, even if there's a 50-50 upside to getting 2 million, right? Like the more exaggerated in one domain you are, the more plateau effect you get in the domain of losses, and the more hyperbolic it gets in the domain of losses. So I bring this up to talk about the state of the soil in the next 5 years, right? So, all of this is about like planting seeds, but doing it like with a farmer's eye to like the state of soil for things around, identity politics. And, I think that, people are well aware that there was a window between the rise of Trump and the mass purge, no platforming tactics of the sort of Media Matters crowd in mid 2017, where the soil was very fertile, and now there's sort of like this locust sort of cicada, that sort of underground kind of aspect to it, and sort of active waiting for this sort of emergent soil. And now, so what I bring up prospect theory to sort of talk about at a theoretical level, like what to expect in the next 5 years in terms of like what will drive risk-seeking behavior in the population, such that people are embracing ideologies that may otherwise, like, it is a risk.
We've seen it. It was the Trump effect. I mean, remember, again, I get all of the criticisms of Charlottesville and even right-wing activism in general, that, activism is a celebration of having power. It is not a way to get power. It's kind of I get that critique. I agree with it to a large extent. I get this idea. I mean, some people have told me flat out, he was like, you had to have, you should have, even, especially you, Spencer, who, embraces the political philosophy of Carl Schmitt, like, you should have known that the state was going to crack down on you, and so on. And I get all that. But what happened? There was an amazing thing that happened in Charlottesville. It was, I agree, devastating to a large degree. It was an amazing thing, and that was this show of force. People were willing to risk a lot. And even though it wasn't as large as these left-wing rallies or whatever, just the fact that it was pretty outlandish. And the fact that it was connected to history, the statues, but it was really about us and coming out. We are white. We are proud. We are here. This was an amazing thing that I don't think we're going to equal in the foreseeable future. And it was a sense of winning. It actually was a celebration of perceived power. And that is how it was viewed in the world. And that is one of the reasons that it was cracked down upon. So it does have something like that has to happen again. But without that sense that we're on the side of Trump, that Trump is pointing in our direction, we're Trump's vanguard. Absent that, I don't think we will have that kind of, you could call it revolutionary energy. I mean, no one was trying to overthrow the government or something in Charlottesville, but it had a bit of that spirit to it. I mean, it was very powerful, and it was something that the establishment did not even imagine being possible 2 years earlier. And so, there has to be some feeling of victory that will give birth to something like that. And I don't see it happening now. I don't know what it will be, because I can't predict it. It's, the readiness is all. We have to be prepared for the future, but we can't just like count on something. Oh, this is going to happen, and I can't. You can't predict what's going to happen in a month. You can't really count on what history is going to give us. But it will have to be something like that in the future. And if we can lay infrastructure now, we could be bigger. We could have a Washington, D.C. rally with 100,000 people. That's been done with conservatism. And Glenn Beck, for God's sake, had a massive rally that also kind of freaked out the establishment, all to a lesser degree, in 2010. Mm-hmm. And, something like that is possible. It's not possible now. Because the state has cracked the nut on how to crack down on us. Our own movement doesn't have that winning feeling. We're kind of on the coming down slope at the end of a paradigm, which is what it is.
Right. I mean, I certainly agree with that as a sort of, state of things.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to take this opportunity to read some Streamlabs super chats. Here we go. $5 from Anonymous. Please ask Richard what he thinks of trying to establish an alt-right entrepreneurial funding network to help generate an elite of our own.
Oh, I mean, 101% support. I don't think I need to say anything.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
Quinn, 2020, $10. Great show. Thanks to all. Where do we go to support Richard now, or to find his Bitcoin address?
You can Google my Bitcoin address. I really should have that just at a public place. I'll put that up on Medium tonight or something like that, or I'll post it again on Twitter. But thank you for that. Actually, you can also donate via Freestarter. I think I need like $3,000 more or something for legal offense fund. That is a good way to support me. But I'll put up my Bitcoin address. I've definitely received significant donations via Bitcoin. So that is much appreciated.
Okay, great. And Passerby, $5, just wants to thank all of us for doing this show. And then how are you guys doing on time? Are we, because I mean, we still have a few things to cover. Are we good, or?
Yeah, I'm good.
You're good?
I'm not tired yet.
I think that this
Keep going. Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, so I guess another question I had is about the lawsuit and how the lawsuit might affect alt-right rhetoric or energies and focus. And Richard, I don't know what your ability to speak on that is, and if you have any thoughts about how you see the lawsuit coming out of Charlottesville affecting the movement. Richard, you first.
Well, I won't talk about specifics, but clearly lawfare is a tactic that is, like a big just bath of cold water on a movement. I mean, there is not only is it demoralizing, but there's an opportunity cost to it, of the sense that we're raising money to pay lawyers, and we're focusing. I spent all morning and afternoon on this lawsuit, so this is not what I should be doing. And so, yes, we need to. It certainly has affected things, and in the establishment. I mean, obviously, I've said as much in my motion to dismiss. This is lawfare. What's happening to me and other people, and it is an attempt to impoverish us. That's what it is. It is vitally important that we win, to put it mildly, especially that this case gets dismissed, or that we win. And I mean, the other side, we're going up against the big boys. We're going up against firms, multi-million-dollar firms, and we just don't have the infrastructure to fight this continually. We need to find ways of avoiding it. But we've got to win it this time. And it's just an outrage. It's a moral outrage that we're being sued for some conspiracy to promote violence or to take away people's civil rights or something in Charlottesville. It's just an outrageous claim.
Richard, can I ask?
Train?
Yeah, I did a stream on JF's show last week that was a dissection of the modern media landscape, complete with an overview of David Brock's leaked sort of confidential Share Blue memo. Did you happen to see that, Richard?
We actually talked about this a little bit together, and then I'm not sure I listened to that on the stream.
Okay, I'll send you. If you're all, I just recommend that everyone who's watching this see this. It really is, I think, imperative to actually. There's a section about an hour long in the middle. Maybe I'll just post on my Twitter after this so that people can link to the exact start time of that section. But it's really imperative for understanding the strategy against alternative right-wing politics in 2017, because this was it was basically published the week before Trump took office, and it identified alternative right-wing media and ascendant personalities as being the key strategic threat to that's necessary for progressive power players to wipe out in order to undermine the groundswell of the MAGA movement. And there's a section in there on relentless and nonstop lawfare and undermining the influential alternative right wing thinkers. And what's important to sort of think about from that is that there is if there's plausible deniability to bring a lawsuit, it will be brought. And there's something called anti-SLAPP, which is basically like one of the legal toolkits that political thinkers are able to wield against this sort of thing, which is that if you can prove that a lawsuit is frivolous, right, and you can dismiss it on summary judgment with the other side paying your legal fees. And it's very important to, in my view, until there's institutional infrastructure developed, to recognize that lawfare is absolutely a killer. And it always has been, always will be, for this reason. It is free to bring a lawsuit, and it is expensive as fuck to defend it. Pardon my language, but the thing is, plaintiffs' counsels work on commission, defense counsels work by the hour. So, it's free to bring a lawsuit if provided you have an attorney who's willing to take 30% of the settlement or 30% of the court judgment. But defense attorneys don't work on commission; they work by the hour, and these lawsuits stretch on for years. There's an article that I shared on JF's stream about I think it was a Washington Post article, bragging, like we're winning the war against Trump because all of his allies are drowning in legal fees with a Mueller investigation. And it has the effect of not just diverting resources that could otherwise be going to activism or infrastructure or salaries, but it also takes up the time and energy of the individuals involved. They need to be a key part of the legal strategy. And then it also has the divide and conquer tactic where other people don't want to be roped into your network because they don't want to be exposed. They don't want to be named in a lawsuit. They don't want to be exposed to liability. So even people who would otherwise be your allies suddenly have a lot to lose. So, but this is why it's also essential that there is that a legal defense fund, but a legal offense fund is a critical part of the emerging infrastructure that has to be laid down over the next 5 years. I've personally spoken to a number of attorneys, young, and a lot of them are young guys still in law school. Experienced the feeling that many lawyers, many pre-barred lawyers, feel, which is that, oh God, contract law is actually not really going to provide me with a lot of meaning. I would like to be involved in right-wing politics, and this is what I'm passionate about. They're obviously scared because of changes, to the American Bar Association rules with respect to hate speech, and And I'm actually curious, Richard, in your experience, about the Kyle Bristow situation and others who have, but maybe you can't talk about that publicly. But
well, I mean, look, Kyle, I can talk about things objectively, things that happen. I don't need to talk about things that might have happened behind the scenes. Yeah, I mean, Kyle Bristow was put under a tremendous amount of pressure, and he wanted to end it, and I understand it. Yeah. He brought on that pressure. He unnecessarily brought on a lot of the pressure, to be frank, but he brought it on, and it's okay. We need to respect people who are genuinely on our side. Maybe that they decide to leave, and because God knows it's extremely hard, and people want to crush us. Yeah. They don't want to. If you go into contract law or corporate law or something like that, there aren't people out there who want to crush you. If you go into this profession, there are people who want to crush you, and it is hard. It was funny. A guy just sent me a goodwill message on Twitter. He said 95% of activists of any persuasion would have cracked by now, but he was like, "There's no way you're going to crack. You're tenacious," and I hope that's true.
Yeah. Well, there begins to be a point where, it's like you become. Have you ever read Bonfire of the Vandys?
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah,
there's a great scene. I know this is a non sequitur, but it's funny, so I'm just going to say it. There's a great scene, right, where he's on trial. The whole premise is he hit a guy with a car, but there's sort of racial implications, and he's a liberal, sort of Upper West Side guy, and his whole world is overturned, and it becomes a media circus. And there's this. My favorite moment in the book is. He's thinking about committing suicide and throwing himself out the window. The pressure is too much to bear.
Yeah.
But then one guy in his building knocks on his door, and right as he's thinking about ending it, this guy tells him that he can't be associated with him anymore. And by the way, I never liked you anyway. In this apartment building, and right when he leaves, the protagonist has this will to live. He's like, I'm going to live now for no other reason than just so that son of a bitch doesn't get away with saying that to me.
Right.
And there is kind of a hardening inflection point, and I'm not sure how much Kyle Bristow was. I just don't know much about it, but I will say that what is important strategically in my mind is doing favors for people who have different political views than you, but stand for your principles. And this is something like the ACLU, for example, right? The ACLU is, I think, it's not controversial to say, especially in light of their infamous tweet where they tweeted, I don't know if you're aware of when on July 4th or something, they tweeted this is what the future of America should look like. And it's a little blonde haired, blue eyed kid waving an American flag. And they just meant it to say patriotism and is good, but because he's white, they were pilloried on social media, and then they deleted the tweet and issued an apology. That's the ACLU, right? But at the same time, they are the kind of organization who might be prone to defend you in certain situations.
Interestingly, I'll just jump in on this specific example. The ACLU was working with Jason Kessler, who organized the rally, along with some others who helped out, and not me. But the ACLU was on board, and until they weren't. And there was actually an interesting a story on this in the New York Times and the New York Times podcast. Which I listen to. Maybe that's the most controversial thing I've said tonight. But they were talking about this generational divide, and they were speaking to some of these older, actually mostly Jewish ACLU leaders who defended this very famous, not literally Nazi rally in a small town. I can't remember the name of the town at the moment, but it was a literal Nazi rally in this small town that actually included many Holocaust survivors. And it was the it was beyond bad optics and so on.
Right.
It was, but they went to bat for them. And you basically, that is an older generation, a more principled classical liberal generation. When they were speaking to some of the new millennial, mixed race, Hispanic, maybe black, Cal Berkeley educated, all that kind of stuff, they had no interest in that. And they were clearly reaching you do not tolerate the intolerant. Karl Popper, aphorism. It's a bit of a Schmittian aphorism, actually. Schmidt actually made the argument that before 1933 made the argument that because both the Nazi Party and the Communist Party were revolutionary, that they actually should not be allowed into Parliament. And then once Nazis came to power, Carl Schmitt actually defended them as a sovereign entity. I mean, he's an interesting figure, kind of Hobbesian figure. But anyway, Hobbes had a very similar story. I mean, I think that there's a generational change. I don't fundamentally disagree with you right now. But I have to say, my outlook on where the liberal left is maybe not as bright. I'm of course not going to push away any ally or not exactly an ally, but kind of a strategic partner of sorts. However, I think that after Trump, whether Trump leaves in 2020 or whether he stays on in 2024 or whether he's impeached, all of those are possibilities. I think there is going to be a major revenge against the right, not just us, and maybe not primarily us, actually. I think there's going to be a major revenge against people who supported Trump by these institutions, the deep state, if you want to call it. And I also think that generationally speaking, there is a lot of hope in Gen Z. It seems like every Gen Z person, I just had a long conversation with a 20-year-old kid, actually, who I've gotten to know. And he was amazing. And, so there's a lot of hope in Gen Z. But in terms of, aging Gen Xers like myself and particularly millennials, I don't think on a whole, there might be some good ones there no doubt are, but on a whole, I think there's going to be some revenge. And I think there's going to be a much different paradigm that older classical liberal, we believe in American values of talking it out. The answer to bad speech is more good speech, all that kind of stuff. I actually think that there is going to be a overt intolerance by this rising generation of people at places like the ACLU, places in government, and so on. I'm not saying this because I like it. It's just that's if I were to bet, that's my gut feeling that this kind of thing is going to happen.
Oh, well, I don't think. I mean, I think that's almost that's like bedrock data point, to me, like that. There's nothing controversial in that statement, and that's part of what you identified earlier as things getting worse before they get better. I wasn't aware of those sort of generational gaps at the ACLU specifically. So that was
the New York Times thesis, basically, and it was interesting. It was basically 30-year-olds were Popperian, and the 70-year-olds sounded like Ludwig von Mises or something. They were a very interesting generational divide.
Yeah. Well, let me propose a bit of an APAC strategy with regard to these kind of things. So, one of the reasons that I brought up the ACLU and doing favors for people who are perhaps ideological allies. Allies on principle, but opponents on ideology.
Right.
Is the mindset of doing favors for organizations and offering to help them in unconditionally, and instead of the mindset of these people are here to serve us. Like I do think that there's almost a bit of a sort of Howard Cosell, Muhammad Ali kind of like a lot of these media organizations and whatnot, like. It would be a big win for, a low-level person at, a BuzzFeed or an ACLU or some of these organizations just to have a sort of, let me stick with the ACLU. I think that it might be strategically. I think it's important to kind of be in the habit of helping these groups to the extent that you can, and thinking about what resources one might have as sort of a node in a network of sort of the nationalist right wing politics to see what you can do to help an organization like the ACLU.
To help?
So that's one of the So that's something that I'm not sure that the ACLU, because I can't think of anything offhand there other than just kind of maintaining friendly relations with a particular, or sending an update, or saying, hey, by the way, just to, friendly heads up, here's a PDF of, what we're doing in the next 3 months to help, to help this and the other thing. And, have a great Christmas, or, whatever it is, just to look, I know it seems silly, right? But like
a little skeptical of this heart-right strategy.
I mean, that's obvious. The reason I brought up the AIPAC example was because one of the things that they do is they identify strategic relationships, and then they help them in times of need, not necessarily like during, if somebody is, if you think about what the assets of a movement are, like, it could just be bodies on the ground. Like, maybe they need, people to show up to, an event that they're doing, or maybe it's financial capital, or maybe it's, amplifying, something as simple as like amplifying social media, and which is something that I think is very much underutilized for a movement that is mostly online and was really fantastic at driving hashtags until Twitter adapted by shadow banning them.
Right.
They only shadow the overtly political hashtags. There may be institutions that you could that could be sort of allies or allies of allies that you can help without it being a news cycle per se, and having sort of a favors for favors if certain milestones of help are achieved. Like, for example, maybe you can help a small corporation by driving their social media, and if a certain amount of metrics are achieved, you can get a certain amount of financial capital, or you can, and look at, there's silly things like that.
I'm not against like hearing suggestions like this. I just, and in a way during the Trump campaign, we were kind of doing that in the sense that we were also going to rallies, and we were certainly boosting Trump's signal. And that is one of the reasons why Trump has never really denounced us. He's kind of denounced things here and there, saying we all denounce the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists and the neo-Nazis or whatever. Well, that's not the alt-right, so that's interesting. But, and even the David Duke situation, where he just basically refused to denounce David Duke, even though he clearly knew who David Duke was. It's interesting. But I just, again, if the alt-right is going to promote a product, I mean, it seems almost like the kiss of death. And in many ways also, these corporations, and the conservative movement and so on, they are so ideologically driven that that is more important than profit. Right. And, we could maybe work with them on some really clandestine level, okay, Apple computer is the official laptop of the alt-right, or, would they possibly go for that, even if they could sell a few more? I seriously doubt it. I jokingly said, and it was a complete joke, because I'm a Depeche Mode fan. I was talking to someone actually during CPAC, and they said, "What music do you listen to?" And I said, total joke. I said, "Well, Depeche Mode is the official band of the alt-right." Within an hour, their press had said, "No, this is not true." And then actually, one of my heroes, Dave Gahan, called me a cunt. Although in Britain that's a little bit of a different thing. But he also said, "Oh, he's a very intelligent. It makes it worse," kind of thing. But anyway, it's fine. I'm fine with it. I still like their music. I still love their music, actually. But I'm not against hearing these suggestions. It just strikes me as a no, it's not going to work.
Right. Okay. So let me just kind of bring up like the main reason that I was sort of bringing it up, which is to sort of get in the mindset of thinking about capital and assets, and also a state of where things are now versus a year and a half ago. So,
right.
What it means, for example, to be alt-right now is very different than it was in January of 2017. Remember, at that time, Mike Cernovich and Paul Joseph Watson, like still identified as alt-right, and Breitbart was still like the platform of the alt-right, and this was
amazing moment.
Yeah, but these the assets and capital that could have been said to have belonged to the alternative right at that moment in time were very large, right? Breitbart has ads, right? I mean, they help businesses and they promote goods and services. Mike, the alt-right folks everywhere from InfoWars to, the Lawrence Southerns and PJWs and Mike Cernoviches, they do have some mainstream cachet. They do have enough reach that they could, the capital within the movement was large enough at that moment in time to be able to help allies and do favors for favors and scale on that basis, because you are connecting to other networks, and then you are sort of...
It was amazing. In 2016, as an example, in the Republican National Convention, there was a party that, when I look back on it now, it is surreal. There was a party that included Steve Bannon. It included Mike Cernovich. It included me. It included Roosh. It included Garrett Wilders. It included Pamela Geller, arch neoconservative. It included this just really appalling gay art. I think might have been promoted by Lucian Winstrich. I mean, it was in some ways a clusterfuck. And Milo, of course, Milo was there at the center. And that was an amazing moment when all of the alt-right, the alt-right really writ large was coming together, and we were not counter-signaling each other. I remember seeing Mike Cernovich at that party, and Mike Cernovich had attacked me, just on Twitter. I mean, it's not a big deal, but, I went up to him and was like, oh, hey, doing a great job, go on. He said the same thing to me, and it was totally amicable, and that was great. But that, one could go back now and just blame Hailgate and say, oh, it was the Atlantic ruined everything. Richard should never have let them in. And then also that those 6 kids who threw up Roman salutes, they were whatever. You can go back and blame it. But at some level, that split was probably inevitable. And without that split, we might be in a very different situation. What Milo saw and what Steve Bannon saw in 2016 was a edgy, young, hip, but also ultimately racialist movement that they were trying to bring into their orbit. So Milo wanted, no question, he wanted the alt-right to be the Milo movement. He wanted to be at the center of it. All the trolls were going to love him. He was going to be the center of it. He eventually started to go against it when it got a little too real. After the 2016 conference and Hail Trump, after the fact that I didn't break down on that, I basically said, look, people got out of hand. I was being provocative, but no, we're not backing down. We're moving forward. After the punch, where I, burst onto the scene after some rallies, the alt-right was codified, and I mean, not exactly codified, but it was identified as a movement for which race is essential. At this point, you can't really be alt-right without being a white identitarian. Now, you could say that was really problematic, that, that was terrible, but the thing is, if that split had not happened, the alt-right could have been a term that adopted in which, there's this footnote, Richard Spencer created it, and there were some racist trolls. But no. It's the MAGA movement. It's the pro-Trump, wear red hats, Jack Posobiec movement or something like that. I think that would have been actually terrible. And I am glad that we were not co-opted. And there is no question that Steve Bannon and Milo wanted to do that. Now, at that time, the way I refrained from attacking Milo. There was a time when in September when the Daily Stormer and all these people were just going after Milo insanely. I refrained. I just did not take part because I felt like we were benefiting from that mainstream acceptance more than they were going to own us. And we were the small ones. They were the big ones. We needed to roll with it. But at some point, we have to express who we are. And, Hailgate, much like Charlottesville, maybe a little bit like the Punch, I took something on that one. There was a cost involved, no question. But something like that would have happened. Like, that would have happened just later. If Hailgate never happened and I had come on the scene in 2017 to the Punch or in Charlottesville 1, Mike Cernovich would have denounced us because the alt-right it touches that third rail. It gets at that essential thing. And those people who want to stay either, Republican or like Lawrence Southern, they kind of want to dip their toe in things and, stay above it. They aren't ultimately going to come here. They are not, it's not even the really controversial things, like super controversial things that I kind of don't like the Daily Stormer stuff. It's not even the Jewish question or Kevin McDonald. I mean, it is even just race realism. I mean, they could barely tolerate that as a scientific query. They really cannot tolerate white identity. That is it. Once you step over that line, all of those people are going to go. Now, could we have benefited from holding on to that ambiguity a couple more months or something? Sure, I'll go along with that. But was that split ultimately inevitable and beneficial? Yes.
Yeah. So, my response to that is returning focus to the concept of capital, right? Because, if you're talking about, ideological movements and paths to power, I brought up the ACLU point because it related to the lawfare point, and the lawfare point related to capital. Do you have the capital to defend yourself? Do you have the capital to promote your ideology? And my point was, in bringing up sort of the state of things now versus early 2017 was, there was capital a year and a half ago that there isn't now, to think. To put yourself in the position to make the next step to achieving certain modicum of institutional and political power, it requires the accretion of capital. And so I think, in the next 12 to 24 months, the focus is, what kinds of capital is it possible to grow and develop? Is it financial? Is it number of bodies? Are you going, and remember, whatever it is that you're focused on, it should be measured by people who are leaders of a cause. These things, should be, what KPIs are you, what key performance indicators are you focused on? And, do make a solid concrete goals, see if you hit them. And if you don't, do an analysis of why, but then, recognize that things like lawfare are going to destroy, any movement that does not have sufficient capital to weather such wars of attrition. And if you appear in public, you are subjecting yourself to lawfare, right? If someone attacks you, you are going to get sued, right? I mean, we saw that in the Harris case, I believe, and others, right? So
he attacked an older gentleman. He took his flag. I mean, I've seen video of this. He took his flag, and then the older gentleman brought it back, and then there was some attacks on this person. I mean, it was a somewhat ambiguous situation, but it looked to me like he was defending himself. And this black character raised tons of money and bought a Mercedes. All this. There was this huge outpouring of sympathy for him, far larger than the outpour of sympathy for me, in my legal fundraiser, and so on. I mean, the institutional waves are going against us, no question.
Right. So, but I bring this up to say that, being connected to something larger than being connected to adjacent movements, causes, and institutions is in my view, is critical to being able to, while you're doing everything you can for yourself, it is critical for being able to open trade routes to help yourself accrue capital. And the main reason I bring up now versus a year and a half ago is because, you know, the cutting off from trade routes with adjacent things like gun, I mean, things that had nothing to do with identity, right? Like, I'm sure the NRA has to disavow and like other, I'm not sure, but, you know, like, and what is the path to having, you know, positive identity that can help out adjacent, you know, structures and be, and develop reciprocal relations with them, which is part of why I talk about, you know, my sort of big tent philosophy for these sorts of things. And, but, you know, I mean, the main point is like, I was curious to hear your response actually about the ACLU example of like, well, what favors could you do for an organization like that? You know, and I would say at this moment in time, I think you're right that the answer is no, but it's a useful thought experiment to think, okay, if you had 12 months, if you could work for 12 months with the goal of, you know, providing some value to the NRA, what could you do? Like, could you get 100 people to help them throw an event? Could you co-promote something that isn't related to something third rail, but helps you in an adjacent vector? You know, like, for example, like a lot of people think that helping the alt-right to some extent, you know, helps, you know, a certain modicum of identity politics for Europeans. So like things like that, they accrue institutional power because you have relations, you know, like you have relationships in place. You can, you have an army behind you, at least until the moment they disavow you. But it's that accretion of capital that I think is the chief strategic focus, not necessarily, and that's a different mindset than thinking like, you know, well, which rally can we throw, and, you know, how can we get favorable press?
You're right. I agree. I think that moment of the media blitz and the activism is over. I would, you know, just to be brief, I would bring us back to that immune system. The fact that the NRA is going to be deathly afraid of dealing with anyone who is explicit. Now, could we thread some needle and have, you know, like a patriotic group? There was actually a group called Youth for Western Civilization from, I guess it's about 7 years ago now. And that group was not racialist, but it basically was anti-affirmative action and for immigration restriction. And could a needle be thread that, you know, there are communications? I would just remind you, you know, the Proud Boys, that person said he was kicked out of the Proud Boys for being a Jewish alt-right fellow traveler. The people like the alt-right, I mean, I don't know. They attacked me before I attacked them. And many of them I have never attacked. I you know, criticized, but just the ones that I find pretty toxic, like, you know, disgusting, like Jack Posobiec or whatever. I've criticized Lauren Southern. I've never attacked her or anything. But you know, they are part of that immune system. It's even stronger with them, and they will attack us. There's no question. Mike Cernovich will absolutely lie about us, and we saw that over the summer. He's kind of gone off into new things now, but so again, that immune system is very strong, and we are slamming up against a wall. I think one interesting thing that I should not do myself is that needle threading of, could there be a kind of, probably not MAGA, but kind of MAGA-esque group, you know, immigration restriction, American nationalism, but of a non-racial variety or whatever, anti-affirmative action would be interesting. I don't know if Proud Boys even talk about that issue, but could something like that exist that is not anti-us? Because the alt-right that does exist is anti-us. So could something like that? That's an interesting thing. So it's not going to be a identitarian group. That's not going to work. It has to thread that needle. Now, I can't be the one organizing this, period, but it would be interesting if that could be done. The other aspect is, which I think is more advantageous, is the non-public facing network. We need to get together. I've had some very interesting conversations recently with people who have said just this. These people have a tremendous amount to lose. There is no way in hell that they would ever go to a Charlottesville. There's no way they would ever go to an MPI or an Amarin conference or something like that. But they want to get connected, and we need to work with them. So that is something that I am working on, and I do think we need to build up a network power that can be prepared when another moment presents itself, and another moment will present itself.
Richard, on the go ahead, Frame.
Sorry, one quick point. Well, you mentioned the immune system of the Republican Party, and one counterpoint to that is actually the lesson of Roy Moore and the importance of jurisdictional focus and sort of neighborhood. Roy Moore. Let's pretend for a moment that Roy Moore won, right? It was a very close election. I mean, he lost, but Trump did not want Roy Moore. He was a Bannon pick, but in a world where Roy Moore was basically, put through because of a perception that the soil was fertile enough in that particular jurisdiction for someone like Roy Moore to achieve institutional political power. Roy Moore would not have been, no matter how much pull Bannon had at the time, he wouldn't have been, put up for the Republican Senate in New York, right? Like, it was because of what the perception was in Alabama at that time, on the riding the MAGA coattails, but also with a thumb on the pulse of Alabama jurisdictional politics.
Right.
That was a moment that a lever of political power could have been achieved, even though the entire establishment was generally the nationwide establishment against it. Even Donald Trump was against Roy Moore, but because of local politics and local dominance by Bannon-style, politics.
Right.
There was a moment, right? There was a wave that could have crashed in a favorable direction for people who are, identitarians or whatnot, right? But my point is, thinking,
would he have ever done anything for us? It's like I kind of agree he was better on immigration and so on. But in terms, so for a kind of MAGA right, that could have been better. Even though Trump didn't want him, he would have, loyally supported Trump if he had been in office, and might have been good on the immigration question, no question. But would he really have done something for us? Because, I have a kind of critical connection to immigration reform. I have criticized them. From the right, from a good place, more than I've supported them. I don't think they are the answer. And so would even Roy Moore, I wouldn't be surprised if Roy Moore denounced us. The immune system is so strong. So I agree with what you're saying in terms of local control. Breitbart got behind Roy Moore. The Posobiec, Cernovich world got behind Roy Moore. And that is no question how he was able to do that. It showed a certain leverage power of those types of people, that alternative media, the other alt-right in a way. But even if he had succeeded against this, liberal outrage against him, would that have even been pushing the ball forward in the way that I want it to go forward? I'm not so sure about that.
All right, so let me hop in real quick. Jet RPG $20 says, "Great job, man." So I had a question about sort of the rhetorical strategy and how it relates to, I guess one of the problems I see in white identity politics is there's a lack of, really, frankly, white identity amongst the population. And I guess the question is, like, what is the best way to increase that awareness of being white? Carl, I assume both of you are familiar with Carl Schmitt and the concept political and his friend enemy distinction. And so is it necessary to have an enemy in order to raise that awareness of our own collective identity?
Yes. I mean, an enemy isn't just necessarily, in that sense of like you hate this person and want to destroy them or something. Carl Schmitt actually did talk about such an absolute enemy. But no, I think white identity arises vis-a-vis the other. And so one needs the other. One has to see one's kind of reflection in the other in order to recognize oneself as something. I think that one of the reasons why there was, the white identity in a way hasn't worked in America is precisely because it is a white country. I mean, you can, through self-segregation, through geographic isolation, through private schooling and going to the froofy shopping mall as opposed to the dangerous one. People have been able to isolate themselves from the consequences of immigration. And in a way, they exist in this kind of identityless realm where it's a lot of white people and some Jews and some high IQ Indians and Asians or whatever. And it just feels white. And they think, why can't all of America be like this? Oh, we've just all got to convince them to embrace our principles or something. And we know that it goes against human nature and racial reality. But there's no question to me that, that white identity, identity itself needs the other. We have to respectfully recognize otherness in order to achieve ourselves. In a way, the white person, and I'm going to sound like a leftist here, the white person who wants to force his value on a black or Hispanic immigrant or saying, just be American, go buy a gun and support the troops and love the Constitution or whatever. Like you are tearing down their identity. You aren't seriously understanding them. And in a weird way, someone like myself, I can have more empathy for the African American experience as other to me, or an Asian immigrant as other to me, in a way that a conservative can't. Because for them, we are all individuals, and you must assimilate, you must embrace our principles, all that kind of stuff. I don't want that. I don't think that's possible from anyone else, and I don't think that's desirable. There's no question. A lot of people say, demographics are against your movement or whatever. I would say, no, demographics are supporting our movement. There will be a increase in identitarian consciousness through multiculturalism.
Yeah. So I have, a lot of thoughts on this question. I think one of the things that differentiates me from Richard and maybe a number of people who are watching the video is that I have a sort of big tent philosophy on what it means to be, sort of white positive and how you conceptualize. Let me just talk about the concept of the other for a second. I forget if it was Reagan or someone else who ex-president had this quote about like the best way to bring humanity together, united all nations, is for an alien species to come in and threaten to destroy the world, right? Like in the face of an other that is threatening to destroy everyone becomes united against it, and and it's sort of the whole 1984, like who's the guy that they do the 2 minutes hate against, Goldstein,
right? Yeah,
something, right?
That's terrible. So
but how you define the other? So it's obviously useful as a motivating and mobilizing political force, and as a way of consolidating a sense of one's own identity, to have intense awareness of other identities. But there's also limits to that, and I would say I would take a lesson out of the SJW playbook and look at how SJWs were able to define white people, and they do not say that they are against white people, right? They say they're against systems of whiteness. And what they attack is the perpetuation of and participation in systems of whiteness. So that whenever you rhetorically attempt to challenge the Bailey, that is the, the sort of aggressive, what they're obviously trying to do of like, you're attacking white people.
Right.
Like they can very easily retreat to the moat of, no, listen, we're attacking systems of whiteness. So when we make you go through mandatory employee training where you need to pledge to be an ally to another identity group and atone for, the collective sins of your ancestors, like we're not attacking you as a white person, even though you have to do this training because you're white. It's the system is how they've defined it. And I do think that such kinds of framing are an essential tool in being able to be very dynamic in how you foster a sense of identity in peoples of European heritage who are under attack. That is, the ability to frame it as a system, as something that is, and this is one of the things, there are a lot of people who follow my content who, say a lot of very not nice things, which, and look, whatever, I'm thick-skinned and find it funny. I can take it, but like, there's a lot of comments about Jewish people, black people, Hispanic, like whatever it is. And it's done on the basis of people. And that, beyond being something that I just disagree with at a moral level, I think that it is tactically very inappropriate, even if that was your strategic goal. And I had to switch sides on the chessboard, and believing what they believed, I had to play their board, play their position. I would consider that worse than tilting it at windmills, because who are you doing favors for? How are you actually helping yourself? Like, except to the extent that it might be a morale boost to people who are already converted. There are ways to frame the issue in a way that utilize that sort of like game theory aspect of things, where you can approach things via proxies, via systems, so that you're not demonizing any particular person or group. But what you are doing is rightly calling out system-wide problems and making a part of your demands the dismantling of those systems, rather than the expulsion of people, or there are things like that, right? But that's also maybe because I have different goals than others. So, but that is something that I did want to voice here. By the way, I only have about 10-15 more minutes tonight, so just FYI.
Yeah, and this has been a great conversation. I mean, we still have this whole other topic, optics and aesthetics. I mean, maybe I can get you guys back another time. We could even do that.
Save that one. It's interesting that we didn't even get to the topic.
No, this is amazing. Man, you guys are doing great. I mean, Frame, is there anything, if you've only got 10-15 minutes, I know Richard is going to hang, if you still have time, Richard, for a private conversation with this guy Duvid. But Frame, is there a topic that's on your mind that you want to get to?
I'll respond real quickly to that. Real quick. I get it, and I don't deny the logic of what you're saying, the strategic logic of what you're saying. But the fact is, they do hate us, and we do need to recognize that. Even if we don't talk about that all the time, they do want to eliminate white people from Western countries. And maybe maybe white genocide's a little much, but they want a total absence of consciousness. They want a predomination of the good ones, the good whites, who are hipster individualist liberals or whatever. They want a kind of Western civilization, ironically, without us in it. So they want the iPhone and feminism and so on. They don't want white people predominating. And I again, so we need to recognize that this isn't just to frame game. This actually is serious, and it is very much a zero-sum game at some very basic level. Now, can we better express many of our points in kind of systematic ways, or we're against affirmative action because it's unfair? Sure, I'm not really against that. I think other people should do that. But what I am for is raising consciousness. And that is something that is very real. Right now, the white race is unconscious. They obviously know who they are. They grasp that they're under attack, even explicitly, as that poll has revealed. We need them to consciously advocate for themselves, to consciously even want to rule. And that is, maybe we can get some little strategic victories here and there with saying, we're against affirmative action because of this reason, or immigration's bad because it affects the black working class, or whatever. I mean, that's fine. Not against anyone doing that. But the ultimate game is towards identity, consciousness, and at the end of the day, it is for different types of people to be in power. I mean, it's not just about winning some little victory in 2018. It is for a different types of people to rule. And that is what I want. It is a political game and not just a kind of logic or verbal game. And we do need to, at some level, be conscious of our ultimate end goal.
Yeah, well, I mean, my response to that would be, we obviously have differences on sort of philosophy and sort of visions of the world that we want. So I'll sort of just kind of leave it to the chat to just kind of see some of the. I think it was instructive for both of for us to both kind of put forward our own things there. But
I think this was great, actually.
I will use an example about an unrelated point, which is. White identity, and you use the example of multiculturalism, and the other, so the demographic death of whites and so much of the Western world is as being sort of a driver of white identity. One thing that I actually think is a very interesting data point is Hungary, and the way Hungary has actually. I'll give an example. I posted a link in the chat here, Brundle, if you want to share it with.
I saw them.
And what it was Facebook removing a Hungarian government video. Mm-hmm. Facebook removed a Hungarian government video. This is from just like a couple months ago about white Christians. And so basically, a minister at the Hungarian Prime Minister's office posted a video on his official Facebook page which claimed that white Christians are gone from parts of Vienna, and the same could happen in Hungary. Some of the direct quotes were, "In Vienna, there are lots of schools where there are no longer white Viennese children, only Muslim immigrants. The white Austrian Christians moved out, and immigrants." All this. Hungary is not Hungary is not subject to the same kinds of diversifying other than the gypsy. Sort of demographic, but gypsies are not politically mobilized in the same way that, there's no diversity industry per se in Hungary, or at least not as of the date of this video. But that is an example of, to the extent that the other there is migrants and immigrants and whatnot. It's multiculturalism was not a necessary precondition to that sort of white awareness achieving institutional power, but what it was a national awareness of threat. And the fact is, one of the reasons why things were so ascendant in early 2017 is because alternative right-wing views were finally achieving media, Breitbart was a huge institution that was threatening to challenge Fox News at the time. Bannon was in the White House and normalized that way. You had not yet had the purge on social media. And it was control over media raising national consciousness. And the fact is, that was really achieved because Orban basically nationalized, nationalized the Hungarian media, and through that is able to develop, basically systems of consciousness that he can sort of move in and out of, whether he's talking about white, whether he's talking about Christian, whether he's talking about Hungarian. So, part of the challenge is getting, there's obviously a
there is an other, though. I mean, the other is perhaps to some degree the Soviet past. The other is the refugee crisis, which is clearly a racial crisis at the most basic level, and a religious one. There's the other of looking upon America and looking upon Western Europe and saying, we don't want that. So there is an other, and it is different. But I would also say that America is not a normal country. Breitbart can get really excited about, nationalism vicariously, like with the based Poles, the based Hungarians, maybe the based Czechs, and so on. They're not going to they'll get a little excited about the based Germans, but only because they have all these banners of destroying the swastika and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
They aren't, not all nationalisms are equal. And the other aspect is that America is the force of this. I mean, we live in an American world. We live, all of those, both Poland and Hungary, Poland especially, are key strategic pawns on the chessboard to the American system. And they might actually like a little bit of rough and tumble nationalism on the borderland as a kind of anti-Russian aspect. So, that kind of small nationalism is tolerated elsewhere. We cannot be Finland in the United States. I mean, this is our world that we're dominating. We are the ones pushing the ideology. We are the ones who have military control, which is absolutely essential for our ability to push the ideology. We're the one pushing the culture. So we cannot be a small country like that. Like, as much as I kind of like a lot of the way that Ramsey Paul has gone and all this, it's not going to work here. It is exceptional. Much like whites can't really play the multiculti game. Maybe we could in 50 years. I wouldn't be against, a white advocacy group that sits down at the multicultural table and say, oh, we want this, we'll work with you, we get our Gibbs too, whatever. That's okay. That's not going to happen. We are exceptional, and it's not going to work here. And we do need to realize that we're in a different situation. Now, the good thing about that is that something that happens in America has shock waves across the world. If we could radically change things here, things like if Europe would just go right. I mean, things would change dramatically if we could change the system of culture creation, of different systems of military power. The world would be immediate almost overnight. It's almost like we're in a worse position. It's harder to be a nationalist here. It's easier to be, say, in Italy and Hungary. We look upon them, longingly and jealously. But in a way, what we do matters more. Just by the aspects of history and geopolitics.
Yeah. Brundle, can I just lead the conversation real quick?
You'll get the last one.
There's one last. Well, there's just one last. I think it's also just fun and a bit of like intellectual break from some of the heavier stuff that we've covered, which is I wanted your thoughts on the role of technological change and genetic, a topic that fascinates me, which is sort of genetic engineering, the nascent field that's developed already in the past decade. We've seen the rise of 23andMe, CRISPR. There's now the ability to sort of change single cell, or single gene editing in offspring. And recently the first person was like born that had like genes from 3 different. I mean, there's going to be as we talk about changing demographic trends, which is something that really drew me to thinking about, identity matters. We also are going to see in the next 50 years the rise potentially of transracialism and the ability to race is a non-immutable characteristic. Is that on your radar at all? If not, what's your preliminary thoughts?
It's on my radar. It's not something that I've really thought about deeply. First off, I think that some people can get overestimate this. Remember, people in the 1950s thought that AI was like full on, conscious and indeed evil AI was coming by the year 2000. Mm-hmm. And that is just really dramatically overrated. I mean, the AI that we have, the idea that it is conscious and that it's not just engaging in pattern recognition and so on. I think we can overestimate this. I think there will be designer babies to a degree, the degree, in the foreseeable future, but the degree to which we are truly like questioning the human condition in our lifetime, I'm skeptical of that, to be honest. But I would say this: I am a eugenicist. I'm not necessarily I'm not just a pure conservative or a pure individual will. I want humans to become better, to become more beautiful, less susceptible to disease, to become more athletic, to become certainly more intelligent. I think we have the capability to do that. And I also would say I am not a libertarian about these matters. At some point, we must become conscious of this technological change, and we must channel the technological change for our benefit. We must engage in conscious evolution for a higher state of being. It cannot be just simply designer babies, and we obviously need to move away from this just dysgenic trend that we're headed down. We need to. And China is actually well aware of this, and they are doing serious studies in eugenics. And so on. The Beijing initiative is just one. We need to become aware of what this is. We need to become, like Lothrop Stoddard, aware of the terrible potential consequences that it could have for what it means to be human. And we need to become aware of the amazing benefits. And we need to consciously and probably politically channel this technology in the future. We should control it.
Right. Actually, you bring up China, and China is actually one of the things driving my thesis, because China is 1.6 billion people, 96% Han ethnicity, and they have no bones about genetic engineering and these kinds of policies. And to the extent that it gets seriously developed, in the next 20, 30 years, China's diving into that would create
terrifying.
The Chinese consequences. Yeah,
they're going to create a high IQ ant population. It's just terrifying. We Aryans need to be in control of this technology, perhaps on a global scale. Sorry if this sounds a bit outlandish, but I truly believe this, so that we can humanely institute this technology. Okay. I do not want the Chinese government creating our biological future. That is terrifying, in my opinion.
Okay, well, let me push back. Sorry, Brundle, I know that I'm going to get off in just a few minutes here, just like sort of last thing is I'll take the other side of the AI thing. I mean, okay. The fact is, I was a very competitive chess player, and I came of age in the era of AI defeating mankind, and going from the era from AI was a joke because computers were actually quite bad in the early 90s. Yeah. To AI getting so good that it was better than the world chess
Bobby
champion.
Fischer kicked the computer's ass when he was
they went from a joke to pretty good to whoa, this is kind of scary, to beating Garry Kasparov, to it being incapable for you to be a competitive chess player unless you have Fritz or Hydra or some other supercomputer to analyze your games with. So it becomes essential as a training tool. And now with machine learning, there was recently, AI is so important and effective now that it is the first line of defense for hate speech laws by YouTube. So I would say that in many ways, I think that whatever conception there was of AI, it actually underestimated it. But anyway, maybe I'll leave with that thought. I know that
we could go into this. This is a terribly interesting question.
Okay. And I definitely want to do it would be great to continue this conversation at a later date. I mean, we have this topic, we have the issue of gender and ethnicity vanishing. I mean, optics versus aesthetics. I mean, we go on for hours.
Gender hasn't vanished.
Okay, my final question, and I'm going to leave before Richard answers it. He doesn't even need to answer it, but I want him to go to think about this question maybe like in the wind on a bike ride, like in the months in the future.
Yeah.
If it was possible for a non-white person to adopt a white, to have melanin levels changed, to have, if there was a way in the future to sort of, pharmaceutically or therapeutically or surgically, alter one's phenotype to resemble that, to have more in common with another ethnic group, for example, would that impact your vision of the world, or your,
no,
would that change?
Because phenotype race is much, much deeper than phenotype. I think getting caught up on IQ and all this stuff is in some ways a diversion. And I might sound like Evola here in a way. Being an Aryan is not just a biological aspect, although it is that. It is a spiritual aspect, most importantly, and that is something that conceivably could be affected by massive genetic engineering in the future. And again, that's why we need to control this science. But it's not going to be affected by changing melanin or phenotype, nose size, or eye color, or something like that. Being white is much, much deeper than that, and it is spiritual. I can imagine whites existing and not really being white, being so humiliated and being so maybe dysgenically inclined. That we're just mere genetic material, but we as a race, we are a spiritual being first.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks everyone for the conversation.
It was great. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Okay, good night.
Yeah, it was awesome. Mm-hmm. All right. So before we go offline, Duvid, did you have a reaction to the stream tonight?
It was interesting, kind of boring because I've watched a lot of stream before.
Oh, fuck you. I guess we're just kidding. That was a joke, don't worry.
I mean, most of what is said has been said by both of you many times in different places, so thank God I have a good memory.
It's still played out. I saw Spencer in 2015, and then it was fresh at that point.
I don't mind you doing it, but it's just like a stump speech or a song that.
All right, David. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Richard. Richard, do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I will put up some. I'll put up my Bitcoin addresses on Twitter. Altright.com is coming back. I am just dealing with so much shit right now. Please be patient. And everything is coming back. I am doing work 24/7 behind the scenes. So if you guys can just be patient with me, you'll be rewarded. We're going to build back these institutions on a stronger footing, and they're going to be better. So just wait for it. But in the meantime, I'm going to do a lot of stay relevant in the movement, doing a lot of streams like this, and talking to new people and stuff like that. So it'll be fun.
Okay. Great. Yeah, thanks for coming, Richard. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We hit 400 viewers tonight live, which is more viewers than I have subscribers, which was awesome. So thanks, everybody, tuned in. I hope you guys hang around for other shows we do or go back and look at some of our older content. We have a lot of fun here discussing a lot of issues relevant to the alt-right and more generally. So thanks, everybody.